Hi everyone, welcome back. So today we're checking in on the starter that we started a few days ago. So this should be almost good to go. I noted yesterday when I refreshed this that it took about 4 to 6 hours to double in size. And then Sophia, if you would come in close, you can see now that the bubbles have become tiny and they're mostly on the surface. This is a good sign. The thing that you should smell at this point is that it's when you first pop the top off of it, without getting your face too close, you should get a big whiff of alcohol, ethyl alcohol, and it's a starter. So we still want to keep feeding it through 5 days, and then the next actual episode in the series will be starting to create some bread with this. So I'm going to feed this after we end this, and we'll continue to check in on tomorrow. But what I wanted to talk to you about today are some of the tools, ingredients, and resources that I use. These are some of the ingredients that I like to use, and I brought out every single piece of equipment that I have, every tool that I use, just so we can go over what I think is necessary and what isn't. So ingredient-wise, I mentioned the other day that I like this central milling company. I tend to use durum flour a lot. This is also known as semolina, and it's fine ground by these guys, which is really amazing, and it makes wonderful bread. Bread that you typically find in the Puglia region of Italy, and I just love the flavor. I like rye, I like whole wheat. I mentioned kamut the other day, or Khorasan. Kamut is actually the brand name. Khorasan, this ancient grain. Spelt. This is the big bag of plain unbleached bread flour that we have. And I got a big bag because we're working on building a wood-fired pizza oven, and it's kind of paused. And but once it's done, I plan on having a dozen people over at a time typically, and that's a lot of flour. So I'm not a hoarder, but I do happen to have a lot of flour around. So the other thing that I mentioned the other day was when we get to actually building our sourdough, it's not going to be like this white bread that we made. It's not going to have any fat in it or any sugar or any milk or anything like that. It's going to be flour, water, salt, and the sourdough itself, the sourdough starter, or the preferment. So flour, we've talked about. Water, we've said just use filtered water, it's fine. Unless you have some really bad water where you live, you don't need to use bottled water. So salt, I use just plain fine sea salt, fine Morton salt when I need it to get mixed in really fast. But my favorite is Diamond Crystal kosher salt. The thing about kosher salt is it's really airy. So volume-wise, it weighs half of what this weighs. So if you take a tablespoon of this and a tablespoon of this, you're only getting half as much salt by weight, which is, again, the reason why it's important to use a scale. So other ingredients that I happen to have around, I use rice flour to line the insides of my bannetons, which we'll talk about in a second. And I do that because I really don't like the flavor of cooked, unhydrated flour. What does that mean? The flour that's on the outside of your loaf, I think it tastes terrible. So rice flour doesn't have much of a taste, and it's really easy to wipe off. Bran flakes, this also makes a nice liner for the bread that you're going to use when you put it inside either a towel in a bowl or a banneton. And again, you can brush most of it off, but it's a nice looking thing and it tastes pretty good too. So honestly, that's about it for ingredients. So what I want to do is talk about things that I have in the kitchen and things that I don't think you really need. So you do need mixing bowls. A friend of mine emailed after seeing the first video and said, does it matter what I put my sourdough in? Well, yes, a little, but not much. So you can see that I use a Pyrex bowl. These are 7 cups and they have a lid. And like I mentioned in the very first video, it should be airtight, but we also want something that if this expands really fast, it's not going to blow off and get sourdough all over your house, which I've actually heard of. So when it comes time to storing it, you can store it in plastic. I happen to like these glass ones a lot because I can feed it in the same container and store it in the same container. And when it comes time to building this up so that we can actually make a loaf of bread, I can get a lot of sourdough in here. So mixing. Oh, I keep forgetting to say this, but you can use plastic. There are certain metals that you're not supposed to use. I think copper is one of them, but stainless steel is certainly fine for the mixing process. You saw me use the KitchenAid bowl the other day, which is stainless. It's perfectly fine to mix and even proof your sourdough in something like this. I love this big glass metal bowl because it tends to not move around. I don't have to hold it as firmly when I'm stirring, but it does make the scale more less accurate. So if you can imagine, this thing weighs like 2 or 3 pounds. When I go to add, 12 grams of salt to this or 20 grams of salt to this, it's not as sensitive. So what I tend to do is use a little thing like this. I zero out the scale and then I put the salt in that. So just some ideas. So what do you need? You need something to mix in and you need something to mix with. So I like wooden spoons for just pre-mixing everything. And I definitely like spatulas that don't have a removable head because it's really easy to be stirring the sourdough and pull this out and then this part stays in the sourdough, which is kind of gross. So nothing to get into different parts of this, and they're just really handy. Okay, so Sophia, you can come with me if you would. A couple things that you've already seen. I tend to proof my dough in something like this with a rubber band around it so I can see how much it's risen. Do you need this? No, you can just put a cover, something like that shower cap that you saw the other day over your mixing bowl, and that's just fine. Other mixing and dividing tools, you saw the rubber scraper, the stiffer scraper, and then a bench knife. Do you need any of these? No, I'd say if I had to do with just one of them, I'd get something like this from King Arthur Flour or someplace else that does a combination of cutting, if you need to separate your dough into pieces. And this is really handy when you get to doing things like a dozen pizza dough balls. But it's also nice for helping to fold over your dough in the bowl, which we'll get to also soon. So I definitely use parchment paper to slide loaves onto the stone. Do you need a stone? No, so none of this stuff is absolutely required. The spray oil is nice inside the tub so that you can get your dough out a little easier, but not necessary. So we mentioned that there are 3 kinds of loaves that we're going to be making. We'll do one of them in loaf pans, so you can get any size or shape that you want. I happen to like these 2 a lot. This is the new one that I tried and mentioned that I should have increased my dough volume. You can get a baguette pan like this, which is really nice. And you just shape the baguettes, leave them here to proof, and then the whole thing goes right into the oven, and I even put it on the stone. So they all kind of match. The first loaf that we'll actually make, we're going to do in this cast iron Dutch oven. And this is amazing. The whole no-knead bread revolution, the tartine bread, these are done in this. And the reason is because we're going to keep all of the steam in there, which allows the loaf to grow. If there's one thing that I would recommend having is something like this, or a ceramic pot, whatever it is that's got a lid that is supposed to go on it, something that can get heated while empty. We'll heat this first and then we'll throw the bread in. And then in order to actually handle that, you absolutely need some sort of hot pad. I would recommend gloves. There's way less chance that you're going to burn yourself by accidentally touching part of your hand on it or touching the inside of your oven as you try to move this around. A stone. If you have a baking stone, great. This stone is thicker than the round stone that I have, which is really great. It means that the bread can absorb a lot more heat before cooling the stone down itself, and it gets a great oven spring. So, Banneton. So what do we put on this? The loaves that I make, I typically proof in one of these two Bannetons. They're wicker baskets that I will line with the rice flour that you saw earlier. And I can get about a 900 gram loaf into this one and about a 700 gram loaf into that. So when I do that, I'll let them proof for however long it takes. Then I'll put a piece of parchment on top of it and flip it over onto a baking peel. And so we're going to look at, or a bread peel. We're going to look at that right now. So this is the first peel that I ever got, and I got it when we were living on Guam. And if you just want one, I'd say aluminum is the way to go, because you can put parchment on this and it slides easily. You can sprinkle it with flour and slide it easily. And it's great in the pizza oven because I can stick this under a pizza and lift it up into the air so that the top continues cooking but the bottom is off of the platform itself. It gets really hot, which is why I would not use the wooden one for that purpose. So why do I have the wooden one? Well, this one's really nice because it's got a nice long handle, so I can put a pizza into the oven from a distance. You can see this is the side that touches the bottom. But the nice thing about wood is that the dough comes off of it easier than it does the aluminum, which is kind of counterintuitive sounding. If you imagine, this is definitely smoother, but if there's any moisture on the dough, it will just stick to this like glue. So I use this for putting things in, I use this for taking things out. But again, if I had to choose just one, it would be an aluminum peel with a longer handle. If you don't have that, then you can use a baking sheet that doesn't have a rim, or you can flip one upside down, put the bread on that, and slide it in. So one thing that I keep around is a ratty old baking sheet. This will go in the bottom part of the oven, and when we put the loaves in, when they're cooked on the stone, I'll pour a bunch of water into this. It creates a nice steamy environment, which we'll learn more about later. So going back to the Bannetons or whatever we proof things in, when I flip these over onto the parchment, then we've hopefully got the pretty side up, and we'll score the bread. We'll talk a lot about scoring later, but there are two reasons that we score it. One is so that the bread can open up and rise better, and the second is just because it's pretty. So we'll talk about both purposes. These should cost you no more than $10, and you should get a packet of razors with them too. These tend to last a long time if you keep them clean, so I just wipe them off once I'm finished. We talked about the Thermopin. This is great for measuring your water temperature because you do not want to go over 115 or Fahrenheit, or you will kill your starter. The other thermometer that I have is an infrared thermometer, and this measures the surface temperature of whatever you're looking at, which is really nice so that you can measure the surface temperature of the stone or the oven itself or the inside of a pot like this. I think that's about it. So I do use a whisk to mix together dry ingredients, and I do want to say, as much as I love my digital scale, I always check my salt measurements for just a ballpark figure with measuring spoons. That's about the only reason I use measuring spoons. So that's about it for tools. I want to mention a couple of things. I have a few very, very favorite resources that I go to. My favorite online bread resource is The Fresh Loaf. It's a whole bunch of home bakers mixed with a couple professionals who have a great forum, and if you're looking for a nice baguette recipe or something, it's a great place to go and read what people are doing in their home ovens, with their home mixers, with their home sourdough starters. My next favorite resource, something that I go back to over and over and over again, is Peter Reinhardt's book, The Baker's Apprentice. If there's one book that I would recommend, it's that. I absolutely love it. Perhaps the King Arthur Flour Company baking book. That's amazing too. I have lots of baking books. I don't typically follow the recipes in them anymore, but it's a great place to start and then venture out from there. I try to take notes on what I do, what worked, what didn't work, but I don't have a journal or anything like that, but I know some people really love that. Sourdough.com. I mean, you can just Google sourdough recipes and you'll come up with a whole bunch of great stuff. There are thousands and thousands of people who are baking at home and coming up with just great creations and really creative uses. I haven't ever read Chad Robertson's tartine book, but I've followed the recipe and I really like it a lot. That's a great one. You can find that online all over the place. We'll talk about all those things and the changes that I make here at my house based on what's easy or what I've just come to do as part of my routine. And a lot of this is that. It's what works for your schedule. If you saw the second video that Sophie and I posted, I came back from a run. I had to feed our sourdough. We started this, cooked dinner, took a shower, came back, shot some more, and then finished it up in the morning. It's a lot like that when we have people over for pizza on the weekends. I'll refresh my starter in the morning. I'll mix dough for pizza in the evening, early evening. I'll divide it into pizza balls and I'll stick them in the fridge until the next day, and then take them out 3 hours before we're ready to eat, and then go from there. So that's it for today. Hope you have a great day and stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon with hopefully our first recipe.